Hey guys, it's Chris here. Thanks in advance for checking out the channel. The purpose of this video is to give you a quick crash course on the ribcage, its influence on posture, movement, breathing, and vice versa. Let's also talk about how all of those things influence the ribcage. Certainly works both ways. If you enjoy the content of this video, please drop a like below and don't forget to subscribe. Elsewhere on the channel, you will find some breathing and core exercises that will really help you a lot with the things that I'll talk about today, as well as some more general breathing stuff for your fitness and your well-being. You'll also find a podcast I recorded with David Gray, an amazing coach from Ireland who was certainly my first introduction to the ribcage model like this, and indeed my own ribcage. I hope there's some good information in here for everybody, and I encourage you to leave a comment below if you have any questions. You can find out more about me and the work that I do on my website, breathingdeadly.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at breathingdeadly. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Enjoy. So first of all, let's just even have a quick look at the range of motion of a rib cage. This rib cage can do a lot. Maybe at the moment our rib cages can't quite do so much, but in an ideal world, let's look at some things that this guy should be able to do. Okay, I should be capable of external rotation. That would be my ribs opening up. You could puff your chest out in the front and pull your arms back. External rotation of a rib cage. I should, however, be also capable of internal rotation of a rib cage, externally rotating it, internally rotating it. We could confirm this by looking at someone from the front. I could see that they are internally rotating it. If they are able to take this angle here, this is called your infrasternal angle, and if I can take this a little bit smaller, maybe I'm internally rotating my rib cage. If I could open this up a little bit further, I'm externally rotating my rib cage. I should be also capable of some elevation of the rib cage, lifting my chest up, and some depression of the rib cage, bringing that chest down, okay? Bringing the whole ribs down, in fact. I should be capable of, when I'm rotating side to side, you'll find that one rib cage needs to internally rotate, one rib cage needs to externally rotate. If I want to turn my right side to my left, I would love as many things in my body on my right side internally rotating, and as many things on my body on my left side externally rotating. I want my whole body to turn to the left by the sound of things, not just, for example, my neck or my lower back. And a rib cage that doesn't like to internally rotate on one side probably isn't going to help the rest of the body turn to the side. I'll still turn to the side, but I'll either be very stiff in doing so, or it'll be my lower back, my neck, something else making up for the fact that this guy, which is quite a big chunk of your spine, doesn't really like to turn. So that internal rotation and external rotation that I showed you at the start is very useful in movement. I'm going to need internal rotation on one side here. The internal rotation, by the way, is the tricky one. Okay, typically most people are almost stuck in external rotation. This isn't one that we need to train so much for now. Likely the best place to train will be looking for some internal rotation, particularly at the start. Think about bending over as well, or tying your shoelaces. This is called flexion of your spine. If I slouch forward, flexion. Think about the whole spine. Wouldn't I love some help from this part of my body to bend over? When you bend over, assuming you're trying to pick something up off the floor, you're trying to take your arms and your shoulders closer to the ground. And a spine or a rib cage that doesn't really like to depress in the front because it likes too much to elevate, well, when it bends over, somewhere else in the body is going to have to provide that flexion. I learned about this the hard way, unfortunately, and this was my introduction to the ribs. Was my guys were so stuck in an externally rotated position, so flared, I had no movement, none. In fact, every time I moved, this probably cut itself off or shut itself off even more at the back. And anytime, I'm a martial arts jiu-jitsu instructor, anytime I took my spine into flexion, it was all happening at my low back, my neck. This was just made of wood, plank of wood at the back. And luckily I have restored some of the mobility and movement to this area, meaning that if I was to touch my toes to tie my shoelaces now, this part of my body helps. This is where your arms are, and those guys would love to get down to the floor instead of taking the whole thing in one piece. So again, some things that this guy should be able to do broadly We should be able to elevate it. We should be able to depress it. We should be able to internally rotate it. I have to get better at using this. We have to be able to internally rotate it and externally rotate it. The funny thing is, many people, I see a lot of people, as you can imagine, as part of a consultation process or an exercise class that I'm teaching or something like this. Most of us, we can do this one no problem. We love to stick the chest out and go shoulders back. Most of us can do this one no problem. We love to externally rotate those ribs, big wide ribs. Often many people that come to me for training, I can see their ribs through their skin and they can see their ribs through the skin as well. Not saying that's something to worry about necessarily, but it just shows me that you like this one a little bit too much, okay? And remember, something that is stuck like this, oh, it can't really rotate as much and it can't really bend over as much. So not just in isolation, I'm not just in an exercise for the ribs should we find some of these movements, but everywhere in your daily life you are going to find these movements, and your body is very smart. So if it can't get the movement from here, it will get the movement elsewhere. In fact, it's very smart, but it's not smart enough because something else is going to negatively impact from this, very likely. That was absolutely my story. My low back took the brunt. I had a low back surgery. I had struggled with low back pain for many years, and I never did anything to assess this. Thoracic mobility. This is your thoracic spine, your upper back. Thoracic mobility, if you type on YouTube or Google thoracic mobility exercises, and ones that I have experienced as well, it's all stuff like this. You know, how far can you rotate side to side? How much can you open up your back? When I did these thoracic mobility exercises, I felt my low back going boom, 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 popping. If I open up like this, it actually felt quite nice. This is just a confirmation in my body that my low back is the one that's moving there. If my low back wasn't moving, which it probably shouldn't in a thoracic mobility exercise, well then my low back wouldn't have pop. It's popping like that because, you know, it's moving around a lot more than it should be. Thoracic mobility should include stuff like this. Should be able to open up this space. Thoracic mobility should include stuff, I have to get better at using this, should include stuff like this. Look, this is your thoracic. Your ribs are stuck to your thoracic, and thoracic mobility without rib cage stuff is crazy, absolutely crazy, especially when you can see how closely connected they are. So just to recap on that section, we have elevation, we have depression, we have, this is the tricky one, internal rotation, that was a good one, external rotation as well, and likely we have all kinds of those. What if I was to take my right hand down to my left toes? I'm going to have hopefully some depression, some internal rotation, some external rotation, quite a lot going on there. Remember, if your rib cage isn't doing all of those things, well then when you're tying your shoelaces, something else is doing those things for you. So restoring some of those key fundamental ranges of motion to your rib cage will be very useful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why I think people are finding themselves stuck in this position and finding it hard to get back into their internal rotation. Remember, someone who finds themselves stuck in that position, and a position that they may not even notice that they're stuck in, because up until more recently, watching these videos, perhaps rib cage and rib cage mobility was something that you never considered at all. But I see lots of people, especially considering I was the king of this. I couldn't have been more stuck back here. I was your big brother in that sense. But someone who is stuck like this, we know that they can't really rotate well. We know that they can't really flex well, among other things. Well, why are they ending up like this? Two things that I try to draw everyone's attention to initially in terms of their effect on the rib cage and its position is, one, the breath. I would say 99% of people that I have worked with, either in a group or a one-to-one setting, when I ask them to do this first exercise, a hand on the chest, a hand on the belly, you can join me. Use your nose to breathe in and try to fill yourself up as deep as you can. Really take in as much air as you can. 99% of people, you can do it and breathe out through your nose also. I see chest likes to go up. Sternum likes to go up, neck likes to pull the muscles up, shoulders rise. If you looked at me from the side here from 90 degrees, I see lots of movement in the front of the body, and I see not so much movement in the back of the body. Very, very similar. For many, many people that I see, me included, for a long, long time, their strategy and their body's mechanism of drawing in an inhale comes with lots and lots and lots of this elevation of the ribs in the front, because you spend so much of our day in this state and so much of our lives in this state. The body gets a lot more used to doing this than it does to doing whatever exercises and stretches and bits and bobs you're trying to do to help your back. Okay, remember, opening up your front like this with that big inhale is closing your back. It's a great visual here to see the rib cages attached to the thoracic at the back, but consider the rest of the spine here too. Consider your lower back as you take maybe even an exaggerated. Really, really fill up your chest, your belly. Something else is holding you up there. Think about what's underneath all of this stuff. Think about all the musculature, the muscles of your core. If you fill yourself up in the front and lift up those ribs, I hope you feel that, though, well, I hope you don't feel this, but maybe you do for now. You're going to experience that big stretch in those muscles. If I was going to punch you or drop a medicine ball on your stomach, you're not going to be able to take that. The core doesn't feel engaged. Okay, so first thing that I see that causes people to kind of end up stuck here a little bit is that kind of dysfunctional inhale. We are capable of drawing air in like that. We're capable of drawing air in many ways. We are incredibly adaptive and resilient as a species, but this isn't our only option, okay? This is a shallow chest breath. Often, if you consider a baby, think back to you're holding a baby, maybe your own kid, maybe someone, your brother or a sister, slightly younger than you. Remember when they were crying? Shallow, lots of shoulders, lots of neck like this. This is stressful. This is not good. This is not relaxing. Yes, we can do it. Should we do it all the time? No. Okay. So while I have you there, what should we experience in that exercise? Okay. In an ideal world, you've practiced some of these methods and mechanisms for a number of weeks, maybe even a number of months. Take that big, gentle, soft inhale. I fill myself up completely without having to massively flare the ribs, the belly, without having to lift the shoulders. What am I experiencing there is 360 degrees of expansion. As I breathe in, my rib cage is filling itself up all the way around. I'll remind you, that's where your lungs are, is inside the rib cage. Lungs aren't in the belly, okay? And a rib cage that elevates in the front may feel like we are allowing for a bigger space in the chest to fill up, but it's not the case. Quite a lot of the tissue of the lungs is towards the back, and we can hopefully see how the back is massively, massively compressed in order to lift that chest up. Again, I'm not saying that you should never do that, but I am saying that it's likely that someone who always does that is going to find themselves a little bit stuck like this. So breath and inhale, and someone who draws their breath in with a mechanism or a pattern such as that, very, very likely that we're going to see them kind of living in a position such as that. Our brain and our body doesn't really care about anything other than stopping us from falling over and just collapsing. So our balance is always working, and consistent and cheap inhales and exhales, meaning your body is going to seek the easiest way to draw that inhale and exhale in, as it should. And if the easiest way for your body, based on your choice of exercise method, maybe an injury, maybe a sedentary lifestyle, maybe too much breathing through your mouth, maybe you were coached to breathe into the front of your body as part of a yoga or a meditative practice or something like that, well, then your body is going to sit a little bit more comfortably in those positions. It needs to stay open in the front in order for you to breathe. It needs to stay tight in the back in order for you to breathe. This is changeable and this is trainable. So the first thing that has a massive impact on your rib cage and its position that it basically lives in, which, remember please, is so influential to basically the whole system, okay? We are the middle of our body essentially, and its position is dictated so much by the way that we draw that inhale in, and the rest of the movement of the body down the chain is then impacted by this, good or bad. So breathing is not just for fitness and for meditation and for all sorts. Your breathing strategy, your breathing mechanism, the muscles involved, the movement and the bones that are moving that are involved, this is involved in sports, in rehab, in performance of all kinds. This isn't just about, breathing in, breathing slow for like a Wim Hof or for a yoga. And that's what I find frustrating about. I have said now that I have these breathing exercises, and I have lots of contact from people who have done some Wim Hof or have done some yoga, and they say, "Oh, you're doing breathing exercises too. Nice, keep up the good work." And I'm like, we're doing some very different things. We think we're doing the same thing because we call it breath work, but unless you are making considerations, this is my opinion, unless you are making considerations for the actual mechanics, the muscles, the bones, the movement, the posture, what is happening for you to facilitate that inhale and exhale. Never mind how many inhales and exhales, never mind how fast, how slow, the rhythm, the pace, jumping into cold water, doing a stretch, never mind any of that stuff. How are you moving to draw that inhale and exhale out is massive, and brushing over that, in my opinion, and in my experience, I have had the negative experience of this. I brushed over that for essentially my whole adult life to date, and I paid the price. So breathing and its mechanisms has a massive impact on this. Second thing, shoulder blades and your shoulder blade positioning. If you take your shoulder blades and squeeze them together at the back of your body for me, you might find, I don't know why I breathed in there, you might find that the ribs like to stick out in the front, okay? So shoulder blades back and down, like is commonly cued in the gym, is very likely rib cage open in the front. I'm not saying that that is bad, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. There's many exercises in the gym where shoulders back and down is more than desirable. It's necessary, okay? However, I'm just trying to draw our attention to how often that we do these things. We already perhaps are a person who lives here because of our breathing strategy, and then we go to the gym and we do it even more and more, and then we're breathing hard in those exercises and we're doing it even more. And without even noticing, because I've made no consideration for this area at all, without noticing, I am at rest and at work forcing my body into this externally rotated ribs. And forget about the ribs for a minute. Let's pretend the whole thing is just talking about the spine. I'm spending so much of my day forcing myself into this flexed position. Even think about many people's idea of a good posture, standing up straight with your shoulders back and your chest out. Not the case. This is one end of an extreme, as this is one end of an extreme. Where should we live is somewhere in the middle. There should be a natural curve outwards, away from the spine in your upper back, but often we see the complete opposite, in towards the spine in the upper back. And where is that curve? Is out in the front of the body. Someone who breathes into their chest and into their belly in the front, someone who trains in the gym to pull their shoulders back and down often, we're finding lots and lots of this, okay? What about the opposite of those things? What about a big exhale? Similar to filling yourself up in the front of your body, I want you to use your mouth this time just so we can get more air out. And if you're watching this on your phone, or if you're watching on your laptop, I want you to try to blow the screen over. So you can see I'm trying to blow out for as long as I can, and I want you to hopefully feel some muscles of the core kick in here. Don't stop. I want you to feel some internal rotation of the ribs. If you do, that's fantastic. If you don't, no worries, we can work on this. But similar to how an inhale, a big full one, gives us a lot of this, a complete and a full and a strong exhale should give us a lot of this. Okay, well, straight away, what does that tell us? If someone can't really do this as well as they can do this, well, then we can say they are inhale experts and exhale beginners, and this is not good. You're just stuck in a state of inhalation, and we could go as far as to say that we're incapable of actually getting all of this air out of our body. If we stay too much like this, now that we've just learned that a good strong exhale requires hopefully a lot of this, well, then we know that we just need to exhale more, and we need to learn to exhale more. Breath and its influence as an inhale, breath and its influence as an exhale, both internal and external rotation of the ribs. Okay, what about the shoulder blades again? Protraction of the shoulders would be me taking my shoulders towards you. Remember, shoulders back and down was this. Shoulders back and down is giving all of the space to in the front of my body. The front of my body is opening up. The back of my body is compressing. If I could learn how to protract my shoulders and reach these guys around from their position in the back of the body around the front, this is another thing that's going to aid me out of that externally rotated position and coax me into some internal rotation here. Think about training in the gym, how little focus is put into protraction of the shoulder. Think about even just 10 exercises in the gym. Even think about just exercises for your back. Everything is a pull, opening a band, putting a band over the top of your head. Everything is shoulders back and down, and we need to put a little bit more time for this guy's sake into protraction of the ribs, and we need to put a little bit more time for this guy's sake into a good strong exhalation. To recap, big inhale, that's why you're stuck there. Shoulders back and down too much, that's why you're stuck there. Can't really do a really good exhale, that's why it's hard to get out of there. And protraction, can't really do a good protraction, that's why it's hard to get out of there. So let's talk a little bit about some of the muscles that would be involved in finding some of this internal rotation, and the muscles that we're probably lacking, and they're probably quite weak if we're stuck in this external rotation. Consider basically every muscle in your core. Think about doing a really strong plank or a core workout, abs workout. Everything here is what I'm about to talk about, and everything here is attached to the rib cage in 360 degrees. Some of these muscles just live on the ribs, some of these muscles live below the ribs, and they will do a job to pull it down, some will do a job to rotate it inwards, some will do both, okay? Some are just stabilizing, some are pulling. Muscles' jobs, in a lot of cases, is to be able to move bones, to change the angle of joints. There's lots of joints here, okay? Think about a bicep. Its job is to move my arm like so. The muscles of the core, one of their main jobs is to move the ribs like so. They are attached, yes, to the pelvis too, to connect the rib cage and pelvis, but to move the rib cage. Internal rotation, external rotation, breath. Think about bracing, like you might be familiar with if you're going to do a heavy lift or something like this. We should be capable of engaging 360 degrees of our core, which is going to be very hard if we have to live like this. Imagine to breathe in, I had to keep my arm straight like this, okay? My lungs are in my arm, and I need to keep my arm open like this in order for me to take a good inhale and an exhale. I'm imagining that I'm going to end up with a pretty strong, overworked tricep and a pretty weak bicep. My bicep is stretched and long here. Someone who needs to stay like this to breathe in all day is going to find themselves with an overworked back and a pretty loose and open front. This is me, and this is many people's complaints, guys. Low back pain and upper back pain, mid back pain, all of these areas that I'm demonstrating, hopefully well, that are compressed through our breathing. These are the problem areas. These are where people are spending thousands of euro on physiotherapy, on doctors and consultations and everything. And in my experience of all of that, only once, and that's the guy that I stuck with, Mr. David Gray, only once was the breathing issue raised with me, and that was the only thing that helped me. So, you can make your own assessment on that. The muscle's job is to move the bones, okay? If my bicep couldn't move my arm, we would make a pretty quick assessment that I have a weak bicep. If my core muscles cannot move my ribs, we can make the same assessment. You have pretty weak core muscles. How do I know my ribs can't move? If you look in the mirror and they always stick out through your skin, if you take a big breath out and they don't really go anywhere, if you take a big breath in and they open further, this is also trainable, by the way, guys, and this was me, so don't panic. But this is how we know, visually, this is how I know that you need a little bit more work, internal rotation of the ribs, and a little bit more work in the core. Imagine this was a building. Imagine I was building a statue of the human body, okay? And it was really tall and really heavy. I would do my best to support it in 360 degrees instead of just having all of the weight supported. Imagine your house was only supported by the back wall. This room that I'm in now, imagine the ceiling was only being held up by this wall behind me. I would be worried. I'm glad that I have 4 walls around me holding up the ceiling, and this rib cage would love the 4 walls ish connecting it to the pelvis and holding you up in the air. This rib cage is just being connected from the back in the most part, and in the same way that this rib cage, now my ceiling, is only being held up by 1 wall, which is not good. Sharing the load around the body is as we are designed and is as all of this stuff is intended. So restoring some of the core muscle's ability to internally rotate and control movement in the rib cage is essential. Someone, in my opinion, who cannot, through their breath, manipulate their rib cage and activate their core has missed the basic function of core training. This again was me. I could do a plank, I could do a sit-up, I could do many things, but I could not manipulate my rib cage using my core muscles. I've seen even pictures. I practice jiu-jitsu. There's famous videos of Hickson Gracie and his son Cron Gracie and many people like this doing exercises where they move all the muscles around in their abs and stuff, but the rib cage hasn't moved still. I'm not saying that that is not impressive and that that's not good what they're doing, but that's not what we're talking about. Moving all of this stuff and not moving the ribs would be the same as me holding my arm straight and being able to make my bicep do all these funny things, but it hasn't moved my arm. That's cool, but we can hopefully agree that that's not what your arm is for. That's not what that muscle group is for. This muscle group primarily support, yes, but it is for aid in our respiration in the sense that we need to be able to efficiently control the movement of this guy. Whether you think somebody designed us or whether you think evolution put us here, we are very, very interesting and, complex creatures. And it's no coincidence that we are built in a way that takes a number of functions into account, okay? This area is for holding me up. This area is for bracing as I push against something. But what's more important than that stuff, guys, is breathing. What do you do more than go to the gym, more than play your sport, more than hunt and gather and whatever you think we are intended for is breathe. And this area should be working to control and aid the movement in the rib cage. If it is not, like mine wasn't for a long time, we can assess that it is dysfunctional across the board. It doesn't really matter if you can control it in a plank. I hope this makes sense. It doesn't matter how well you can do it in a plank if you can't do it when you're breathing, because unless you're doing the plank when you're holding your breath, you mustn't be. You mustn't be doing it well in the plank if the breath has to get in the way. So learning how to use the muscles of the core to pull on the bones and pull yourself out of that externally rotated position is massive. You can Google flared ribs on YouTube or on any forum online. There's hundreds of people asking how to get out of this position. There's hundreds of people that know they can look in the mirror and they can see that their ribs stick out and they don't like it. But unfortunately, the way out of this position seems to be a little bit confusing for some. It was for me for a long time, but as soon as I start to feel the benefits and as soon as I start to visually see the gains and see the improvement, it's unquestionably the solution. If my arm was stuck like this, because my tricep was always on, okay, well, let's try to get the bicep on and relax the tricep a bit. If my ribs are stuck like this, I bet you it's because these guys are always on and we don't really have much here. That could be very well because of the breathing. That could be because of activity in the gym that led to the breathing. That could be because you got some really bad news a couple of years ago that changed your breathing pattern. And, without noticing, you started to creep into this. It doesn't really matter how you ended up there. Well, I don't mean it like that. But what matters is how to get out of there. And how to get out of there is opening up the back and, for want of a better word, tightening up the front. Someone whose rib cage does not like to move as they breathe. Someone who cannot use that strong and long exhale to depress, internally rotate and control the ribs likely cannot do that elsewhere in their life or in their sport. Whether all you're trying to do is reach to take something out of the kitchen cupboard, whether you are trying to get down to tie your shoelaces, or whether you are a baseball player, a golfer, a rotation heavy sport, the same thing should be, and maybe isn't, happening at a rib cage. That if we cannot do these things when we breathe, we can very safely assume that they just aren't happening elsewhere in life. Okay, so going back to what you might consider the start or the basics holds massive chance of results and gains. Regress to progress, as they say. Okay, but trying to regain the control of this with your breath should precede trying to regain control of this with a banded movement, or a really complex exercise in the gym. We should be able to get nice gentle inhale without flaring massively, and we should be able to get good strong exhale and internally rotate those ribs and activate our core. I'll remind you that there's videos on my channel to show you how to do just that, so I hope you check those out. These things will trickle into the sports. Ability to do this in your breathing will allow you to do it in your sport. If those muscles are a little bit more used to internally rotating a ribs as part of an exhale, well, then they're going to be there for you, ready to go when you need to internally rotate those ribs as part of a twist, or as part of a punch, or even as part of tying your shoelaces. Someone who is stuck here, to recap, we know they don't really like to bend over so much because now it has to come from somewhere down here. We know they really don't like to twist so much because likely again it's coming from somewhere down here. We know that they don't really like to protract and reach their shoulder forward so much because it takes them into a position that they're not really capable of finding. And something so central to our body, in my experience, has just been completely ignored. I love having this little model because I hope it has helped you understand some of the stuff that I'm talking about. It certainly helped me understand as part of my consultation with David Gray. He used this, and lots of the media and lots of his courses that I have subscribed to, he uses this as part of his demonstrations, and I ate it up, to be honest. I really joined the dots, and I could see so clearly after looking at this. I could see and feel these things in my body. This has been a little introduction to some of the things ribcage wise that I will talk about on the channel. Some of the reasons why the breathing is so important to your posture and your movement, and in my case your pain, and hopefully a little explanation as to how this stuff differs from perhaps a breath work that you may have experienced before, a Wim Hof or similar, or maybe something, a yoga class or meditative breathing practice. I am not discounting any of those things. However, I am just drawing our attention to the shapes that we make when we take an inhale and an exhale, which personally I think is undeniably important. And I am separating myself from the other breathing practices that I mentioned because, in my experience, again, I haven't seen any focus on the shapes really. I've heard people say breathe into your back, but not why and not how. And hopefully through today's video and some of the other videos on my channel, you have understood why, and you will understand how to get yourself out of this and to get yourself more into this. Hopefully you'll also understand why being like this is not so good, especially if you're an athlete or you play sports. And hopefully you can understand why finding some internal rotation of our ribs and finding some depression of our ribs are magical things to do. Thanks so much for checking the video out, guys, and from myself and Nicolas Cage, I hope you have a good day wherever you are in the world, and get to work on some of this stuff if you haven't already. Cheers.